My SDS is about a simple yet complicated group of organisms called algae. Algae, by definition, is a simple, non-flowering plant of a large group that includes the seaweeds and many single-celled forms. Algae contain chlorophyll, but lack true stems, roots, leaves, and vascular tissue. There are many different types of algae, but we will be talking about the differences and characteristics that make each type their own unique organism. The types we will look at are green algae, red algae, brown algae, and an honorable mention for blue-green algae, which isn't really an algae at all, but a bacteria called cyanobacteria. Everyone should be familiar with the largest of the groups, known as green algae. Green algae are members of the division Chlorophyta that comprises between 9,000 and 12,000 species. The photosynthetic pigments, or in simpler terms, the pigments that absorb light and reflect others, chlorophylls A and B, carotene, and xanthophyll, are in the same proportions as those in higher plants like the grass on your lawn or the trees in your backyard. That's why all these, including algae, are green. The typical green algae cell, which can be motile or non-motile, moves or doesn't move, has a central vacuole. Pigments contained in plastids that vary in shape in different species, and a two-layered cellulose and pectin cell wall. Food is stored in pyramids, proteinaceous cores within the plastids. Green algae vary in size and shape, include single-celled, colonial, filamentous, and tubular forms. Sexual reproduction is common with gametes that have 2 or 4 flagella, but asexual reproduction is by cell division and fragmentation, and the spores that are released can be motile or non-motile, moving or non-moving. Many unicellular green algae live in water as plankton, but many also live on land, with fungi and forms known as lichen, which have this super odd anatomy, more complex than fungi and any single algae. The fungi actually live and surround the algae, be it green algae or cyanobacteria, but that is getting away from the topic. The green algae is very common in lakes and rivers and streams, and even oceans or seas. You can find them almost anywhere. These green and normally slimy growths are a consistent sight around the world. Red algae. Red algae are different than green in one regard. Red algae are red because of the presence of the pigment physotherin. This pigment reflects red light and absorbs blue light. Because blue light penetrates water to a greater depth than light of a longer wavelengths, closer to the red spectrum, these pigments allow red algae to photosynthesize and live at somewhat greater depths than most other algae. Some rhodophytes have very little pyrosophterin, and may appear green or bluish from the chlorophyll and other pigments present in them. Red algae also have about
Junior boys basketball meet.
Red algae also have about 6,000 species of predominantly marine algae, often found attached to other shore plants. Their morphological range also includes filamentous, branched, feathered, and sheet-like thalli. They help the plant live on and survive. They actually are more important in some reefs than the corals and are considered super endangered in some harbors. They also have unstacked thylakoids. In most species, thin protoplasmic connections provide continuity between the cells. Reproductive bodies of red algae are non-motile, meaning it isn't capable of movement on its own, so it uses these thin strands for reproduction. They use water to move. They have no way of moving, no flagella or cilia. Brown algae have about 1,500 species of algae in the division Chromatophyta, common in cold waters along continental coast. Species color varies from dark brown to olive green depending upon the proportion and ratio of brown pigment to green pigment. Brown algae vary in form and size, from very small filamentous epiphytes to complex giant kelps that range in size from 1 to more than 100 meters. Other brown algae can be found attached to rocky coasts in temperate zones or floating freely. Freshwater species are rare, Brown algae multiply by asexual and sexual reproduction. Both the motile zoospores and gametes have two unequal flagella. Some seaweed species have gas-filled bladders, which keep photosynthetic parts of the algae thallus floating on or near the surface of the water. There are no known unicellular or colonial representatives, and what sets them apart from other algae is that they are the only algae known to have internal tissue differentiation into conducting tissue. The alginic acids that the brown algae group contain in the cell walls actually is used in many daily applications like printing, ice cream, and toothpaste, and a very important part of lithium batteries. Blue-green algae. The cyanobacteria are the only photosynthetic prokaryotes able to produce oxygen, the only bacteria with actual organelles. But on that topic, for them to produce oxygen, they need to be able to do photosynthesis, which means they have chloroplasts. Because they are photosynthetic and aquatic, cyanobacteria are often called blue-green algae. This name is convenient for talking about organisms in the water that make their own food, but does not reflect any relationship between the cyanobacteria and other organisms called algae. Cyanobacteria are relatives of the bacteria, not eukaryotes, and it is only the chloroplast in eukaryotic algae to which the cyanobacteria are related. They commonly grow to become large enough in colonies for humans to see. They are also very dangerous and can cause nasty infections in people if you are not careful. The similarities. All the groups of algae, including the fake algae, cyanobacteria, use photosynthesis with thylakoids in their chloroplast. Many of the green, brown, or red algae have varying chloroplasts, but all brown algae has 3 thylakoids stacked on top, whereas the others can vary. They are all very important for oxygen production on our planet. Actually, it is even estimated that marine plants produce between 70 and 80% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. Nearly all marine plants are single-celled photosynthetic algae. Green, red, and brown algae also share a lot more in common, with the main difference simply being what types of chlorophyll they have and what light on the spectrum is reflected. Though brown and red algae have no colonies or single-celled organisms, while green algae does. The types of algae can also be different with how much carbon they use and what kind. With delta carbon 13, so red algae using atmosphere carbon uses about 22.5 to 9.6%, while red algae on the bottom of the ocean that uses just ocean carbon uses 34.5% to 29.9%. Brown algae uses 20.8% to 10.5%. Green algae uses 20.3% to 8.8%. In the end, we see that although all the groups share details besides cyanobacteria, they are all very different and deserving of their own individual group.